Number 19, USC 2024 preview on Good Morning College Football. Hello and welcome to episode 69 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you so much for joining us today as we discuss a team in transition, one of several moving conferences for the 2024 season. The USC Trojans, of course, headed to the Big Ten, still hanging on in the top 20 in our team strength power rankings at CFB Winning Edge. But we will discuss a lot of new things on the horizon for head coach Lincoln Riley and this program, including one of the toughest schedules in college football. But first, want to, of course, welcome you to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. We very much would appreciate you subscribing, liking this video and our other videos, which cover a wide range of content across college fantasy football, Devy, and of course the C2C version of the game where you have a college side and an NFL side and build those together. Everything hopefully that you might be looking for reference, for help with getting ready for the 2024 college football season. We hope to offer at CampusToCanton.com, where you can join for as little as $2.99 per month. That level of access also gets you our brand new best ball rankings for the 2024 season. Underdog Fantasy has released for the first time college best ball drafts, which are ongoing, less than 24 hours. And I know tens of thousands of people are already drafting there on Underdog. So Campus to Canton wanted to offer our best ball rankings. If you're interested in trying out that version of the game, you can do so for as little as $2.99 per month at CampusToCanton.com. But of course, we've got a wide range of tiers available, including our C2C Winning Edge and All 22 tier packages, where you get access to a lot of what we discuss here in our team previews, our CFB Winning Edge team profiles, which include player ratings, coach ratings, point spread projections, win total projections, as much information as we could pack into one set of Google Sheets with 134 individual team pages. We will be adding more to those over the course of the final 38 days of the preseason and then into the season as well. You would also get access to our 2024 returning production database, which includes more team pages for all 130 FBS teams, 134, I should say, and include, who's coming back, who's not, who's transferring in, who's transferring out, and all the stats and numbers associated with those across every FBS team. And then finally, our stat profiles are finally available to everyone at the C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier levels. Those also might come in handy when prepping for those best ball drafts on Underdog or CFF supplemental drafts, redraft format. Gives you a little bit of a different view based on a 3-year window for each team, each head coach, and each play caller on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Sometimes can give a little bit of an unexpected result, maybe provide a look at someone who might give a little bit of value compared to other rankings and lists out there, which of course, our CFF team, the CFF guide is available at Campus to Canton, the best version of it. But always trying to find some value where you can. So getting different perspectives, different views, and ours specifically, we try to eliminate uh, talking about the CFB Winning Edge stat projections, try to limit opinion as much as possible. So that level of insight and analysis that you get in the CFF guide is absolutely excellent, adds additional context. But if you want just a little bit of a different way of looking at it in a black and white view, our stat projections can perhaps unearth maybe one or two extra players with a little bit more value than you might expect otherwise. But all of that is out of the way now. Let's talk one big item of news before we get into our USC 2024 team preview. We've got another FBS head coaching move. Sad to hear that Fresno State head coach Jeff Tedford has had to step down due to health reasons following a recent checkup. He announced through a statement from Fresno State earlier this week that Tedford will unfortunately be stepping down. He missed the New Mexico Bowl for the Bulldogs at the end of the 2023 season due to health issues. There had been some speculation as to whether or not he would fully step down ahead of 2024. But, after the bowl game, after, on recruiting day and leading into spring practice, signs were looking like Tedford was expected to return to the sidelines for 2024. But unfortunately, as he said, following a recent checkup, decided he's going to have to step down. So Tedford had a 45-22 overall record in 2 stints at Fresno State. Did step down a couple of years ago. A few years ago, and returned ahead of 2022, where over the last 2 seasons had a 19-8 record. But Fresno State former head coach, now Jeff Tedford, stepping aside. Tim Skipper is going to be the interim head coach for the Bulldogs this season. And the way that we do our our projections at CFB Winning Edge, we do have a head coach specific rating. So without Jeff Tedford, with Skipper not having any FBS head coaching experience, we put in a generic rating for his part of that preseason rating projection. The head coach rating isn't a huge factor because our roster strength ratings carry the most weight. Our team performance ratings that are a 3-year weighted team performance rating in the preseason projections. The head coach rating works in a similar way. It is a weighted team performance history rating just for a specific head coach. So Tedford, certainly one of the most respected head coaches, absolutely at the group of 5 level, but in college football generally. It's a quarterback guru, many might say. So had a lot of success as a head coach, and certainly the last couple of years didn't look like, as far as his rating goes, was in any danger of slipping. But with him no longer there, and with Skipper, not having much of a head coaching resume, did just sort of put in that generic rating. So we will see a little bit of a lower Fresno State rating than we would if Tedford were back and expected to be the head coach this season. But Fresno State still comes in at number 83 in our overall power ratings, number 3 in the Mountain West. I believe the Bulldogs were picked by the media at Mountain West Media Days as the number 3 team in the conference as well. So still in line with expectations for the most part this season. But moving on now to our USC preseason preview. And the Trojans, our projections, our power ratings fall pretty much in line with a lot of those that we've been referencing sort of in our composite of what others out there are saying, whether they're individual media members like Andy Staples at On3 or Mark Schlabach at ESPN, Stuart Mann, The Athletic. whether they are more computer-based analytics systems like ESPN's Football Power Index or SP Plus from Bill Connolly there, or the preseason magazines, the Sporting News, Athlon Sports, of course, Phil Steele, who has both his more opinion-based prediction rankings, but also the Power Poll, which is a little bit more on the computer side of things. And at number 19, USC is in line with most. There's not, for the most part, with maybe one exception, not a very wide range as far as those preseason expectations, power rankings, other rankings. Look like FPI, ESPN's Football Power Index, is on the high side, just one spot ahead of CFB Winning Edge. The Trojans come in at number 18 in FPI's most recent rankings. EA Sports, the power rankings for the College Football 25 video game, which of course early access is available. I'm sure many of you have already taken the field with taken the field for the new video game. But EA Sports also has the Trojans number 19. Kelly Ford, his ratings have the Trojans number 20 nationally. They're number 21 in SP Plus and the Sporting News' preseason top 25. The Trojans number 22 for Athlon Sports preseason magazine, and Andy Staples post-spring power rankings from a month or more ago. Phil Steele has USC at number 24 and 25 in those power poll and predictions in the preseason magazine. Slaybaugh in his post-spring portal top 25 had USC in that number 25 spot. At The Athletic, Stuart Mandel did not have USC ranked among the top 25 teams in his most recent rankings. Bruce Feldman, also of The Athletic, did not include USC in his college football playoff predictions. Didn't expect the Trojans to make the top 12 field for the expanded playoff this year. And then the major outlier, and I know Rob Bowen is a Pac-12 guy, obviously a very, very smart college football mind, has a great model there at Beta Rank, but maybe Rob knows something that we don't for USC, as the Trojans are 40th, number 40 nationally. So a pretty big drop there from the others that we comb through for each preview. But we'll see how, who comes out on the right side once the games kick off. But a lot of the other pieces that we've referenced throughout this preview series, we've talked a lot about the quarterback position. We've discussed, a piece by Bruce Feldman where he got some anonymous quotes from, opposing coaches among the 2025 NFL draft eligible quarterbacks to get their input and insight on the position for most of these, top 20 or so teams. Jordan Reed of ESPN also has had some pieces that we've referenced, and Dane Brugler, and the one that USC has been featured in that we've referenced for the most part is David Hale of ESPN, who had tier rankings for all 135 FBS teams. Miller Moss and Jayden Maiava not mentioned in any of those other pieces that we often reference. So not a lot of insight. There's still a little bit of an ongoing quarterback competition. I think most would say, and I would agree, that Miller Moss, especially based on that excellent, just huge productive performance in the bowl game, where Moss threw for 362 yards, something along those lines, 6 touchdowns, average more than 11.5 yards per attempt. That's about as good as it gets in a single game performance. We don't put a lot of weight on bowl game performance. Really, we don't put any bowl game performance weight into things like our team performance ratings, the stats that we track. We look only at regular season games, also look at only performances against FBS opponents. But that is a great sign, I think, leading into the upcoming season. Also, Lincoln Riley has a tremendous track record with developing quarterbacks. He's worked with some of the more highly rated players at the position, Caleb Williams, of course, being the most recent. Miller Moss was a well-regarded recruit, but not quite, the can't-miss prospect that Caleb Williams was. So we'll see how he does with a full off season leading into this year. We'll see if he's going to be able to hold off Maiava, who was the Mountain West Freshman Player of the Year. But David Hale, and maybe it's because there's a little bit more depth at USC with sort of two quarterbacks that you could see stepping in and being productive players in Lincoln Riley's offensive system. But Hale has USC in Tier 4 alongside Kansas State, where there's a seemingly smooth transition from Will Howard to Avery Johnson. A lot of excitement about his ability. Nebraska, where five-star true freshman is a pretty good place. Dylan Raiola to build the foundation there. Also, a little bit of experience coming back for the Cornhuskers as well. There's a transition, but again, should be a fairly smooth one at Oklahoma with Jackson Arnold, and at Tennessee with Nico Iamaleava. So USC and Miller Moss and Jayden Maiava fit in, understandably with that group of quarterbacks, where maybe not, the highest expectations, but systems, coaches, but also players who get the benefit of the doubt, being slotted in as the next in line in what should be a really, really good situation. But before we dig too much into Moss, let's take a look at how last season fared for the Trojans. And I'm going to share my screen here. If this is your first time with us, we're going to be taking a look at the CFB Winning Edge team profiles. If you were to go into the middle portion of this page under the position and unit ratings and rankings, you'll see the schedule section where our 2024 projections, and we give several different ways of looking at it. But all the way down at the bottom, we've got our review of the previous season. You see USC, of course, jumped out to a 6-0 start. That 3 overtime victory over Arizona was a bit of a disappointment at the time. Didn't realize how good that Arizona team would end up being, but the Trojans survived, had just a 28% post-game win expectancy in that game, according to collegefootballdata.com, their advanced box scores, which we use to find these numbers. That, take a look at a box score, and if that game were to play 100 times, 1,000 times, however many, and based on those same numbers, you would expect USC would have won that game just 28% of the time. So a bit fortunate for the Trojans to come out on top. But at that point, we saw a much different USC team as far as the final results. Lost 5 of the final 6 regular season games, the only victory being another fortunate win against Cal, where USC comes out with a 1-point win, but just a 14% post-game win expectancy number. We're not very competitive, statistically speaking, in those final losses to a real very difficult stretch, of course. Utah, always tough, always plays USC tough. The final score was close, but the box score told otherwise with just 5% there. Washington, national championship game team, Pac-12 champ. Oregon, team that, the way that our team performance numbers work, was a top 2 team in college football last season, just couldn't get over the hump against Washington. And then UCLA, that one may be the most disappointing for the Trojans of that particular group, but also just 5% there. You look at it, add it all up, these numbers where you give, a full wins worth for a 100% post-game win expectancy number, but then that Arizona win, get just 0.28 wins, 0.15 for the Notre Dame loss, 0.5 for Utah, 0.14 for Cal. Finished strong with that Miller Moss MVP performance against Louisville, 92% in the Holiday Bowl. But if you add up all those post-game win expectancy numbers, this USC team played more like a 6.5 to 7 win team last season. So even though it was a disappointing final record, 8-5, 5-4 in conference play, the final season of the Pac-12, because USC was somewhat fortunate to win against both Arizona and Cal, weren't highly competitive, statistically speaking, in that back half of the season in those 5 losses. This team wasn't actually even as good as its final record might indicate, you could say. So USC struggled last season, did end up they were certainly highly rated at the beginning of the year. Our numbers were quite high on USC, I believe. Might have been our preseason Pac-12 favorite, if memory serves. Certainly very much in the mix, but struggled in the back half and ended up with just 6.61 second-order wins, according to those collegefootballdata.com post-game win expectancy numbers. Individual statistics, as usual, the offense under Lincoln Riley was one of the best in college football. USC ranked 31st in overall team performance. So just our grade on how well that team performed based only on statistical measures, on-field performance. We try to use the same scale of our individual player ratings, our team strength ratings, and these team performance ratings. That number ended up working out to USC playing like a top 30 team, roughly, but a top 5 offense, number 4 in offensive team performance, number 7 passing offense, number 3 in rushing offense. But of course, the defense was the major weak spot for USC last season. 108th in overall defensive team performance, 107th against the pass, and one of the very worst rushing defenses, statistically speaking, 127th in rushing team performance on the defensive side of the ball. You look on some of our favorite individual stats, the offense, a lot of top 10, a few top 5 options or categories, I should say. In scoring offense, again, this is FBS opponents only, in the regular season only. USC top 5 in scoring offense, also top 5 in yards per play, top 10 in points per drive. Those are filtered for garbage time by Brian Famo, bcftoys.com, perhaps my favorite individual stat there. Top 11 in yards per pass attempt on offense, top 20 in success rate. Our EPA per play equivalent that we use, also from collegefootballdata.com. They use PPA in their calculations. USC number 6 nationally there. So excellent on offense across the board, but defense, a much different story. 119th in scoring defense, 110th yards per play allowed, 111th in points per drive, 89th in yards per pass attempt, 104th in success rate against, 122nd in that EPA per play equivalent, defensively speaking. So if we look on net or on margin across the board, a lot more outside the top 25, top 35, top 40. This USC team certainly had a lot of room for improvement, especially on the defensive side of the ball. The good news, if you'll look at our coordinator ratings, and it's a little bit, it can be skewed a little bit, like our head coach ratings, like I mentioned for Jeff Tedford there. And I'll give a little bit of a view here on how those work out. So Tedford, we did make the move, put Tim Skipper in here. You can see perhaps maybe this only means something to me, but if there's not a rating there, that means they weren't a head coach. So we did end up just putting the generic 75 for USC. Lincoln Riley here, upper 80s for the most part, some 90s back in his USC days. So grades out decently well there on the offensive coordinator side of things. These are numbers referencing Lincoln Riley. Also, offensive team performance numbers across dating back to 2014. He comes out to our number 1 offensive play caller in the country. It's that one is legitimate, certainly. I feel very confident in that. For the defensive side of the ball, we've got D'Anton Lynn, the new defensive coordinator, as the number one DC in college football. And that's based on just a 1-year performance at UCLA. He was an NFL assistant prior to that, so we don't use team performance numbers for NFL history. Even as a play caller or head coach, if somebody was an NFL head coach. But Lynn had a incredible 1-year turnaround at UCLA last season, graded out with a team performance rating at 95.93. Just excellent for UCLA last season. It is a very, very small sample size. So if these numbers don't improve greatly, expect his rating to fall a bit and perhaps lose that number one spot in the defensive coordinator rankings. But as it stands right now, it's not a perfect system, but D'Anton Lynn was about as good as you could hope for if you were USC hiring a new defensive coordinator. So we'll see how it shakes out for that on-field defensive performance this season. Taking a look at returning production, who's coming back from that 8-5 USC team last season. The big loss, Caleb Williams. And, he perhaps wasn't as spectacular in the back half of the season last year, still did a lot of great things, highly productive. The overall numbers look quite good for Caleb Williams, who, of course, number one NFL draft pick, yet another. And the overall production, Riley has been able to replace, and a lot of it comes from Jayden Maiava, who appeared in 14 games at UNLV last season, threw for over 3,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, was intercepted 10 times. That is an area certainly for improvement, but 8.7 yards per pass attempt, not terrible, not quite as good as Caleb Williams or what we're used to seeing from USC quarterbacks, but Miller Moss, 10.5 yards per pass attempt in his 4 games. That's probably not going to stay quite that high, but we have seen some, Lincoln Riley quarterbacks put up numbers like that in the past. But an excellent small sample size performance, over 70% completion, nearly 71, 681 yards, 7 touchdowns, just 1 interception. And Moss seems like, based on what we've read for spring practice reports and things like that, and then of course the momentum he carried into the offseason with that bowl game performance, seems like he's got a little bit of a lead over Maiava, even though Maiava had an excellent year for UNLV last season. In the rushing numbers, not quite as replace the full level of production, but going from Marshawn Lloyd to Jaquavius Woody Marks seems like could be a fairly smooth transition. Lloyd, of course, looked a lot more explosive in this USC offense than Marks did, and a bit of a struggling Mississippi State offense last season. Marks was also limited a bit by injury, but as we can see, is someone who can catch the ball coming out of the backfield, had 23 catches, 167 yards, and 2 touchdowns last season, was far more productive as a receiver earlier in his career when Mike Leach was the offensive play caller as well as head coach for Mississippi State. Saw a little bit of a drop-off last season. But Marks seems like he's going to step in, certainly is the most experienced player as far as this running back room is concerned. So he'll likely step in, fill that role that Lloyd played quite well. Austin Jones as a very solid backup, somebody who could step in and carry the football, decent workload if need be. That is an area where, the depth at the running back position, at least as far as numbers from last year, not quite as good. Quentin Joyner being the top returner among running backs from 2023, 125 yards and a touchdown on 18 carries last season. The receiving room lost its top 2 targets in Taj Washington and Brendan Rice, both moving on to professional careers, but the talented true freshman class from last year Zachariah Branch, Deuce Robinson. Those two return after having over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns each. Robinson proved to be a big play receiver. That caught me a little bit by surprise, but as a big target, somebody who can stretch the field and go up and get it. Zachariah Branch, not quite as high as far as average depth of target. I mean, more than half of what Robinson had, who was targeted 14 yards down the field on average. It was 6.3 for Branch. But want to get Branch the ball, see what he can do. Get it to him, and he can do a lot of good things on his own to create big plays. But there certainly are some newcomers who are going to fold in and perhaps find a starting spot alongside Robinson, Branch, maybe Kyron Hudson, who didn't have the production but was on the field quite a bit for the Trojans last season. Charles Ross coming in, Jay Fair, Kyle Ford returning after a stint at UCLA. Feel like that this room is going to work itself out, even though there is a lot of production to be replaced. Only 36% of last season's receiving production is back. 31.25 at the yardage level. Feel like there's not going to be a huge drop off. There's a lot of potential in that room, even with Washington and Rice moving on, with Mario Williams and Dorian Singer leaving via the transfer portal. Feel like Robinson, Branch, Kyron Hudson, and those incoming transfers are going to still be in a position to be quite productive. The offensive line lost 2 full-time starters, lost another part-time starter, Michael Tarquin, to the transfer portal. Not as much as far as incoming experience up front. So that perhaps is a little bit more of a question mark for me, that USC offensive line. Defensively, it's a tricky situation because a lot more experience returns on that side of the ball. Top 2 tacklers, Mason Cobb and Jalen Smith, also brought in 2 productive tacklers. Up there, Mascarina. I'm going to totally butcher that name, and my apologies. Mascarenas Arnold coming in from Oregon State. Those 2 should be quite good, should likely start. Arnold as well from Oregon State. Lost Kalen Bullock early to the NFL draft, but returned, 5 of the top 6 and 7 of the top 9 tacklers from last season. So if you're looking for experience to build on, D'Anton Lynn inherits a decent amount of that, but certainly Lynn hit the transfer portal quite hard, especially in the secondary, bringing in a lot of players with starting experience, including a couple from that UCLA unit last season. So though there is a little bit more to work with as far as talent on hand that he inherited experience-wise on the defensive side of the ball, there's a reason that those numbers weren't quite good last season. Was it all coaching? Is Lynn just going to be able to take the core of a lot of those players, a lot of that unit, and shape it into a better performing defense, or is that influx of experience and talent coming from elsewhere going to be the key to a turnaround, or will he be able to turn this unit around? But in overall numbers, you can see USC ranks 81st nationally in our adjusted returning production rankings, 14th in the Big Ten. Offensively, just inside the top 100 in those adjusted returning production numbers. That includes the incoming players like Maiava. If he weren't there, it'd be a slightly lower ranking. As you can see, the raw returning production numbers, USC would have ranked 106th overall, 107th on the offensive side, and 82nd defensively if we're only looking at who's coming back and who's not from 2023. But adjusting for incoming transfers, USC jumped into the top 50 on defense and just inside the top 100 offensively, 81st overall. Let's get back to our team profiles and look at this USC roster. As far as the positions and units go, the raw talent on hand, USC has a lot to work with. If we look only at 247 composite ratings on average by position, that's usually what I'm referencing when I'm talking about raw talent. There's a lot of top 10, top 15 positions. The quarterback is a little bit low, but I think that as we discussed, as Hale said, top 4-tier quarterback, feel like there's the benefit of the doubt for the most part. So not necessarily seeing that as a major issue, even though that group doesn't rank particularly high in our talent ratings. But number 11, running backs, number 10, wide receiver, number 10, tight ends, the 13th in the offensive skill positions overall. So just taking out the offensive line, which only 34th in average rating there. Not quite as talented as the rest of the group, quarterback being the exception. But on defense, I mean, pretty consistent across the board. 14th on the defensive line, 14th at linebacker, 11th in the secondary. Gives you number 14 in average defensive player talent rating according to 247 Sports. 16th on the offensive side of the ball. Works out to top 15 across the full roster. That's slightly better than the similar ratings at Rivals and On3. But when we adjust for experience and production, which is how we get our individual player ratings, we take those talent ratings coming out of high school, but then we make an adjustment based on how long a player has been on campus, and also add some production points based on statistical benchmarks and performance in games. And you can see the numbers shift just a little bit, and in most cases go down. That quarterback room jumps up a bit, top 50 nationally. I think the performance is going to be much better than that, and those numbers will rise if Miller Moss comes out, puts together 3-4 games, not really expecting quite like the bowl game, but if he's throwing for 300 yards and putting up 10 yards per pass attempt in games, he's going to see his rating increase, and as a result, that position strength rating will go up as well. Think it won't be very long before he is a top 25 quarterback, or at least that USC quarterback room is ranked in the top 25 in position strength. But top 15 at running back, top 20 at wide receiver. Already said, I think that group is going to be better as it goes on through the course of the season. Top 40 at tight end, and similar ranking at the offensive line, inside the top 40 there. Defensively, not a huge drop off. This is still a top 20, really top 15 if you just look at those average position strength ratings across the defense. But a long way to go as far as how well it plays on the field. So the depth chart, not a lot of surprises here. We do have Jacoby Lane and Kyron Hudson as starters ahead of Deuce Robinson. I know Robinson had the more yards last season, but based on what we saw coming out of the spring, this is where we are right now. We will be making adjustments. These are not final in any way. They never are. We're happy to take any additional information and make adjustments as needed. But Lake McCree dealing with a little bit of an injury this spring. Hopefully he'll be back and able to step in. But overall, the starting lineup here, solid. The wide receiver group could be even better, probably will be better than it currently rates. But offensively, I'm not necessarily expecting this is going to be a top 5 performing unit in our offensive team performance numbers, but it wouldn't shock me if it would. Lincoln Riley just sort of has certainly the benefit of the doubt from me as far as being able to coach up and develop and scheme up offenses consistently year in and year out. And if that quarterback position works itself out, it'll be a very dangerous unit on offense. Defensively, I've got questions. The talent numbers look pretty good, but the stats and the performance was so bad last season that I'm a bit skeptical. Our numbers have been high on USC in the past. I believe they were a top 5 team this time last year in our power ratings. Obviously, that did not work out. We've been very high on Lincoln Riley as a whole. A lot of his Oklahoma teams, his last 2 or 3 Oklahoma teams, were preseason, top 4 for us, and the defenses held them back. They just did not quite live up to the expectations of our projections. But defensively, and what we saw with D'Anton Lynn last season and his 1-year turnaround at UCLA, which put up somewhat similar defensive team performance numbers. I mean, the Bruins were, not much better than this USC team that he inherited, and he was able to turn it around immediately. Can he do it a second year in a row? We shall see. But, if so, it's probably going to be that revamped secondary with likely 4 first-year starters coming in, a couple of expected first-year starters, Nate Clifton, the transfer from Vandy, and then Easton Mascarenas-Arnold from Oregon State. Those 2 coming in should help what is a pretty talented group at both positions. Cobb has been very productive at linebacker. Jamil Muhammad, the former quarterback, has shown some ability to rush the passer. Bear Alexander was, briefly or rumored to be entering the transfer portal, former highly rated recruit from Georgia, University of Georgia, originally from Texas, but well-traveled. Getting him back was big, and as a 313-pounder in that interior defensive line, somebody who can be very disruptive. USC much happier to have him than not, I expect. Anthony Lucas, another former highly rated transfer, hasn't quite lived up to expectations, and production-wise hasn't quite been there. But that front 4 looks quite good on paper, and hopefully will play much better this season. If USC can stop the run a bit better, which they will be challenged in the Big Ten, then this team is going to be hopefully much more competitive on that side of the football. But touching on being in the Big Ten this season, as you see here in our 2024 schedule projections, these are for our team strength model, those team strength power ratings. We do have 2 other models that we use. One is based entirely on our talent numbers. We call it our talent edge. We do a projected point spread for that. We also do a PRISM, what we call PRSM, projected scoring margin rating system. That's built using our stats projections. That's this number here on the team profiles, where USC ranks 16th in those numbers, 14th on offense, 56th defensively. We use those to do game total projections as well. But in our team strength projections, we've got USC right at 7 in our projected win totals. The number, according to DraftKings, is 7 this morning for that preseason regular season win total. USC odds to make the playoff, right there in line with most of the preseason rankings, and ours as well. The Trojans are tied at 19th in odds to win the national championship, 65-1. So not not very high. Would definitely be a long shot to make the college football playoff. Also right in that range, tied for 20th in the odds, but at 4-1, plus 400 there. 5th to win the Big Ten, but there's a pretty significant drop off between the 4th team, Michigan, and the Trojans. Michigan 6-1 to win the conference. USC is 22-1. But a big reason why expectations aren't particularly high is this schedule is very, very tough. Getting LSU in week 1 on a neutral field Sunday night, it's going to be primetime stage. The college football world will be tuning in. That game looks like a toss-up. Looks like USC will be competitive, but LSU is a favorite by about a field goal in our projections. That game could go either way, but LSU feel like has a little bit more. I mean, they're certainly higher rated in our preseason rankings, but maybe has a few more obvious answers to some of its questions than USC does, potentially. But similar teams, great on offense, new quarterbacks, bad on defense, but a lot of talent. So that should be a fun one. Utah State, like Fresno State, lost its head coach recently. So that should be a game that USC is going to be able to take care of business relatively easily at home. Get an extra week to prepare for that Big Ten debut against Michigan in week 4 on the road at Ann Arbor. That is going to be a tough matchup and a long trip. And that's something specifically that I'm going to be watching and sort of seeing how does this USC team travel. Similar thoughts for the other former Pac-12 teams in the Big Ten, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. How will those miles all add up? A lot of people have questions about what's the weather going to be like late in the season, but as you can see for USC, with another off week in early November, with a road trip to Washington November 2nd, home games against both Nebraska and Notre Dame, and then a road trip to UCLA, the weather really won't be much of an issue, won't be anything out of the ordinary. Even if it's a little colder, wetter in Washington November 2nd, that's a former Pac-12 game. That's something USC would have had to deal with in general. So maybe it'll be chilly at Maryland October 19th, but otherwise, I mean, USC isn't going to have to play in too many rough weather situations. Probably, we're not expecting any, snow games for the Trojans. Maybe in future years, but as far as the schedule goes, which is very, very tough, at least you don't have to worry about that. I am a little bit more worried about how the miles add up in September and October, but then by November, not too bad. But the opponents are going to be tough. Michigan, we've already talked about in our preview series. Penn State as well. Washington went to the national championship game last year. Yeah, they're a much, much different team, but I think still going to be competitive. Notre Dame in the non-conference, as usual, top 6 team in our power rankings, had to play LSU early on. Wisconsin, Minnesota are going to be tough matchups. Rutgers ran the ball quite well. That doesn't match up super well with USC based on what we saw last season. Nebraska, who knows what they're going to look like at the end of the year with Raiola and that second year for Matt Rule. A lot of games that could go either way, but the Trojans are favored in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games according to our projections. So if we adjust that win total based on giving a bonus for each matchup, where the Trojans are favored, a penalty for each game in which USC is an underdog, we would add 0.4 wins to that mix. So we would be over in our sort of adjusted win total projections that we're going to be running this season. But that number on the screen, the 6.98, is our official number. And that's what we've used the last, 4 years since 2021, and have a 60.4% win rate with those regular season win totals over that time. But this USC team could go either way. If it gets more production at the quarterback position, this team could be very dangerous. Any of these matchups where we have the Trojans as an underdog, they're all winnable. 4.5 point underdog against Notre Dame is certainly, that number could very well change by the end of the season. USC might even end up being favored if that Notre Dame offense doesn't come together. Penn State in the middle of the year, that's going to be a tough opponent, but getting that game at home certainly could turn in the Trojans' favor. Wouldn't be at all shocked if by the time that game kicks off, especially if USC is FBS average or better on the defensive side of the ball, then they're going to be in that game. At Michigan, getting the Wolverines early. Yeah, they're the defending national champions, but there's certainly as much, probably more transition going on for the Wolverines this season with Sean Moore taking over as head coach. They also have a new quarterback, new defense, a lot to a lot to work through, and having that game early in the season maybe gives USC a little bit of more of an opportunity to win in Ann Arbor than you would expect if that game were later in the year. And then that LSU game certainly could go either way. So our numbers are a little low on USC because of the strength of schedule, because a lot of the toss-ups, even that the games where we have the Trojans favored: Wisconsin, Minnesota, Maryland, Rutgers, Nebraska. Would we be shocked if USC ends up coming up a little short in one of those? No, I wouldn't, especially based on the last couple of seasons. So not a lot of hard answers, not a huge edge one way or the other. The way our projections see USC, a lot of unknowns, being in a new conference, seeing how that might, change the style of play at all. I'm not I'm not going to say, oh, USC is not going to be able to match up in the tough Big Ten. That we'll see. But based on what we saw last season, the numbers certainly didn't look very good for USC being able to stop teams that want to run it quite as much as Minnesota does, or Rutgers did last season. Wisconsin, not quite as run heavy as they once were, but still able to run the football quite well. Michigan, certainly, I think, will continue to want to run the football. So this USC team could go either way. Could be a top 20 team, could be an 8-9 win team and in the mix for a playoff, but also could be a team that just they can't fix the defense, or can't quite play at the same level offensively as we're used to. If it's not going to be Miller Moss, if there's sort of an ongoing battle between Moss and Maiava, and neither really takes that job over. If the wide receiver room doesn't quite develop like we think it will, if that offensive line, which is maybe the biggest question personnel-wise, doesn't quite gel together, then this USC team could be, fighting for that seventh win at the end of the year. So we'll see. I perhaps have. I know I don't usually make any major declarations on these previews, but I think with USC, I have even fewer expectations, because I think that this squad could go either way. Could be very, very competitive. Could also be a little bit of a disappointment, and kind of fighting for bowl eligibility in the month of November. So that is going to do it for us today. We will be back on Friday for another team preview on Good Morning College Football. Until then, please do subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Please do like this video, other videos on the feed. Follow Campus to Canton on your favorite social media platforms. The Campus to Canton podcast feed has new content for you just about every single day, as well as campustocanton.com, where you have written content, rankings, including those best ball rankings if you're diving into those underdog fantasy drafts. But if you're getting ready for a college fantasy football supplemental draft, C2C startup, whatever it is, hopefully we've got ways to help you at campustocanton.com. And if you want access to these team profiles, those projected depth charts, ratings, rankings, projected point spreads, win totals for all 134 FBS teams, those are available in our CFB Winning Edge team profiles. Our returning production database also available, and our stat projections are out as well to those members at the C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier levels. So if you have any questions, please do reach out to me at CFB Winning Edge on Twitter. Always happy to answer any questions if I can. If you sign up, request access to all of these databases also. But until Friday, hope everyone has a great rest of the week. We will be back for another team preview on Good Morning College Football. Until then, take care.